I had an ordinary life with an ordinary family and ordinary goals. But all that changed after I Googled my family. I wish I never did it. But let me start from the beginning. The very beginning. I was born on the 2nd of November. I grew up with my parents in a small town with a really small population. I had no siblings, no grandparents, no aunts or uncles, but I didn't care. I had my parents, and that was all that mattered. My parents never really told me about my ancestors. I knew I was a mixed Italian-American, but that was the full extent of my knowledge. Other than that, I had no clue who my grandparents and other relatives were. But I guess it never bothered me growing up. I didn't really think about it. My parents never mentioned them, so I guess I didn't think about them either. But it wasn't until 6th grade, when my other friends at school would talk about going to their grandparents' house on the weekends and the amount of presents they got on their birthday because of their relatives. I admit, I was jealous. Was I missing out? Why didn't I have any grandparents or relatives? How come my parents never spoke about them? I decided I would ask my parents about them. Why couldn't we be like a normal family? Why couldn't I have loads of relatives to bring me gifts? That night, I walked right up to my parents. "Where are my grandparents?" I asked. They looked at each other confused. "What?" said my mom. "How come I don't have any grandparents? Everyone else at school does." "Oh," began my dad. "Well," he seemed to hesitate, but then he continued. "They passed away, Franco." I paused. "But what about my aunts and uncles? What about my cousins?" My mom spoke up. "Well, your father and I don't have any brothers or sisters, so that's why you don't have any aunts or uncles. I'm sorry, Franco." I was disappointed, but I believed them. It was a shame I didn't have any more relatives, but it didn't bother me too much. So for several years after that, I ignored it, and I never brought it up with my parents again. Until, that is, when I saw that news article. But more on that later. Something strange about my childhood was the fact that we moved around a lot. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. We moved around yearly, sometimes even monthly, and I really struggled to make close friends. I just didn't have enough time to form a close enough bond with anyone. My parents always told me we moved around a lot because of their jobs, and I believed them. By the time I was 15, we had moved homes 50 times. 50! I didn't realize this was strange until one of my friends asked me where I used to live before, and I told him I lived a lot of places. He asked me how many, and when I said 50, he freaked out. "What?" he said in disbelief. "What's wrong?" I asked, oblivious. "That's crazy, dude." "Why?" "Because you never even have time to live your life. You're too busy moving around. Why do you even have to move that often anyway?" "It's for my parents' work." "What do they do?" I paused. Come to think of it, I had no idea what they did for work. Was it something to do with accounting or marketing? But if I was being completely honest, I was just guessing. In truth, I had no clue. And actually, when I thought about it more, my friend was right. It was pretty weird how often we moved. That wasn't normal. And what kind of job did my parents have that forced them to move 50 times? I confronted them about it, but then seemingly out of nowhere, they started yelling at me, telling me to mind my own business. What had I done wrong? All I wanted was to know what their jobs were. Didn't I have the right to know why they had to uproot me from my life and force me to move every few months? Didn't I deserve to know at least? But they told me to go to my room and not bother them again. It was from that point on that I began to get suspicious. What were they hiding? Who did they really work for? Were my grandparents actually dead, or was it just a lie? For the next few months, those thoughts and concerns swarmed in my head. My trust for my parents started to waver, and I started to question every time we moved from home. It just didn't make any sense. But then, everything changed when I went onto Google. I had a history assignment where I had to research on events surrounding the mafia in the US. I was online when I came across this article on this mob boss or something. He was part of the mafia, and he was now in jail for murder and countless other criminal charges. They showed a picture of him, and I nearly choked on my cup of coffee. He was the spitting image of my dad. I had to rub my eyes and look at it again. If the date hadn't read over 50 years ago, I would have believed it was my dad. But it looked exactly like him. Did my dad have an older twin? And worst thing was, this man was wanted for murder. Then it struck me. Was he my grandfather? I called my dad and showed him the picture. When he came into the room and glanced at my computer screen, he nearly tripped over from the initial surprise. But he soon covered up his mistake by acting dismissive, but it didn't go past me. I saw his father. I saw the break in his facade. I knew he recognized this man. Was it because it was his father? When I asked him who this was, he told me not to think about it. I was still suspicious though. I decided to research a lot about it. What I found blew my mind. Another article showed this man had a son who had gone missing ever since his father was put into jail. This son had also worked in the mafia and he had been notorious for being the father's legacy. But with him gone, the family business was thrown out of balance. They were searching for this son, and to this day, they were still searching for this son. He would be in his 40s now. When they showed a picture from when this son was around my age, I literally felt my mind explode. It was me. It looked exactly like me, but that wasn't possible. I wasn't alive 40 years ago. But then, sudden realization hit me like a punch to the face. It looked like me because this was my father. My father was the son of a mob boss. And that wasn't even the worst part. Apparently, my father had had a really dark past. He was wanted for fraud and scams and murder. My father was a wanted man for murder. Now, this was too much for my mind to comprehend. Everything I knew about my parents was thrown out the window. I started to Google my family name, Romano, and a whole bunch of articles showed up about the Romano family and their criminal past, how they were involved in some of the highest criminal schemes in history. I was part of that family. Generations of criminals lay in my bloodline. I was too shocked to search for any more results. This was too much. What does this mean? Was my dad a criminal? Was he wanted? If the cops found out about my dad, would he go to jail? I decided there was only one thing left to do. I had to speak to my parents, and I wouldn't let them dismiss me like they usually did. I wanted the truth, and I wouldn't take anything else for an answer. That night at dinner, I confronted them at the dinner table. I told them all about the mafia and the article I had seen, and Dad's picture. How he was wanted for murder. My parents were shocked, but then their expressions hardened. They didn't answer me at first. They just looked at each other, and a silent agreement seemed to pass through them. To this day, it still scares me about the fearless look on their faces. "Come on, we'll explain it all to you," said Dad. I blinked again. "Wait, what?" "No, you're right," he said. "It's time you knew the truth." They stood up from the table and walked into the hall. I was still surprised by their sudden leniency, but I followed them through. They headed to the attic. Was there something hidden up there? Any clues? Newspapers from Dad's past? What could possibly be up there? They climbed the ladder and disappeared into the darkness. When I followed them, I couldn't see a thing. "Where are you?" I called out. Then I heard the attic door slam shut. I jumped, rushing toward its hatch. I could hear my parents below talking quickly. "Hey, let me out," I cried. "It's for your own good, sweetie," called my mom. I shook the hatch door, trying to rattle it off its hinges, but it didn't budge. My parents had locked me in the attic. I was trapped. I couldn't believe it. How could they do this to me? I couldn't even trust my own parents. This had to mean it was true, right? Why else would they have locked me up in here? I started to worry about the things they may do to me. I knew too much. I could blow their cover. Would they leave me here forever? Would I ever have a normal life again? I banged on the door again. Should I call the police? A whole night passed. I had to sleep in the attic with mice crawling all through the roof. Eventually, in the morning, they came back up to me. They opened the attic door and I didn't hesitate. I flew through, sprinting down the hall. They called at me to come back, but I wouldn't have it. "No, Franco, let us explain it to you," called Dad. His voice sounded so sincere. Reluctantly, I turned around. "Fine, what is it?" He looked at my mom and took a deep breath and explained everything. My father hadn't murdered anyone. He had been framed. A rival gang had pinpointed him for their attack, since he had secured a deal that hadn't worked well for them. My dad was innocent. He had been born into that mafia life, and he wanted a fresh start. That's when he met my mother. He decided to change his identity. I didn't know what to think. So my father was innocent? He hadn't murdered anyone? I wasn't sure. But then I looked into his eyes, and I believed him. I asked them why they had locked me in the attic. Why not just explain all this to me first? They said they needed to get all their stuff ready first. That's when I noticed the packed bags lying in the hallway. So we were moving again. I sighed, but it felt easier once I knew why we were moving. From that point on, we decided to keep my father's past a secret. It was for the best. We always feared what my father's father, the mob boss, my grandfather, might do. Would he betray my father? If he got out of jail, would he come searching for him? But so far, nothing has happened. We still remain under fake identities. And of course, I'm not going to tell you our real names. All the names you heard in this video were all fake. Yeah, my name isn't really Franco Romano, so don't bother trying to find us.